The Osirian cycle. Figure 82. Osiris as a black god. A very early time, a special group of gods, all local in origin, was brought into a mutual connection which gave rise to an extremely rich growth of myths that overshadowed all other mythology and thus made those divinities the most popular, not only of Egypt but, subsequently, of the whole ancient world. Accordingly, they are best treated separately from the other members of the pantheon, although their cosmic functions have been mentioned in great part in the chapters on the cosmic deities. Here we have the most complete grouping of divine personalities in the whole Egyptian religion, and yet in this very connection, we can notice with especial clearness how little the Egyptians cared for a systematic and logical presentation of their religious beliefs. Figure 83. Osiris hidden in his pillar. The only feeble attempt to describe this cycle systematically was made by the Greek Plutarch of Chæronea, about 120 A.D., in his famous treatise on Isis and Osiris. Although he failed and introduced many non-Egyptian ideas, this little study gives us some valuable information, whereas other Greco-Roman accounts of Egyptian religion contain only fragments of truth. Have occasion to refer to it. In our study, Osiris too was originally the local god of the city of Edfu, also called Didt, in the Delta, which the Greeks termed Busiris, i.e., home of Osiris, and where a strangely shaped pillar with circular projections separating bands of various colors was his symbol. Figure 84. Osiris in the celestial tree. The deity stands between the two obelisks which symbolize time, from a sarcophagus in the Museum of Cairo. Thus he could become the divinity of the most important change, i.e., death, and could be evolved into the patron of the souls of the departed and king of the lower world, being at the same time the lord of resurrection and of new and eternal life. The latter conception gave him great preeminence over the many earlier deities of necropoles who had nothing to do with the hope of resurrection, and who, therefore, with the exception of Anubis, an ancient Upper Egyptian god of the departed, Infra, remained local guardians of the dead. Figure 85. The Nile revives the soul of Osiris sprouting plants. As ruler of the sky, however, he can actually be identified with the sky. He can sit in the celestial tree, or can be that tree itself, or an important part of it. When he grows forth from the tree, he shows his solar nature. As a bull, especially of black color, he is also celestial. 360 or 365 lights were burned in his honor. 365 trees were said to be planted around certain of his temples, etc., thus showing him to be the god of changing time and of the year. Figure 86. Osiris rising to new life in sprouting seeds. As a master of the year, his festivals were chiefly lunar, so that he could easily assume features of the moon, the regulator of the sky. Later he was directly called the moon as renewing himself. Moreover, he can be sought in many important stars or constellations. Thus the morning star was brought into connection with him. Or, rather, with his double, Horus, the parallel queen of the fixed stars and of heaven. Sothis was then associated with him as sister wife or as a mother. Figure 87. Birth and death of the sun, with Osiris as master of the abysmal depth. The sun as a scarab is accompanied by Isis and Nephthys, showing that Re, Khepri, and Osiris are identified. Strangely enough, the earth god Keb stands next in the ship. And then Shu, Heka, magic, Hu, wisdom, and Sia, knowledge. While to the right are three keepers of the gate, evidently of the lower world. Mother Nut receives the sun at nightfall and passes him on to his resting place in the western deep, where the lowest circle of the water of the abyss is depicted as a god in a circular form, and described as this is Osiris who encircles the underworld, due at Figure 88. Osiris as judge on his stairs. The stairs in the accompanying picture, on which there, personified, balance of justice and the gods of the divine circle of Osiris stand, must originally have meant the stairs on which the sun god ascends and descends. The later period, however, seeks Osiris's throne preferably in the depths of the earth or of the sky. From his seat he directs the occupations of the dead, supervising especially since he is connected with the vegetation which comes mysteriously from the deep, the work in fields of Eru. Figure 89. Osiris with the water and plant of life, on which stand his four sons. On his divine helpers in this judicial function. With the stars, he and his whole kingdom arise at night time from the depths. And in other respects also his solar and celestial functions mingle with those of the keeper of the lower world. Osiris with the water and plant of life, on which as the prototype of the dead who stand his four sons gain eternal lyra, for this reason, his name Un-Enofer, or Un-Nofru, Greek of O-F-A-Pi, the good being, characterizes him as the mildest and most beneficent of all the gods. Figure 90. Isis. Osiris himself had once been buried there, and after the dispersion of his members the head at least had remained behind at Abydos, where it was worshipped as the holiest of all relics of the good god. The tomb where his body once had lain, or still was preserved, was found later in a royal tomb of the earliest period, whose owner had been forgotten. This nearness of Osiris made all Egyptians wish to find immortality by being buried at Abydos, so that an immense cemetery developed there. At Memphis, he was soon identified with the local god of the necropolis, the hawk Sokari, and then with Ptah and the deities identified or associated with him, such as the local sacred bull Apis, Hap. Figure 91. The symbol of Isis. We do not know enough about the earliest seats of the worship of Isis in the Delta to say with any certainty whether her primitive local cult was
g. at Pahibet, the Ayin of the Greeks and the modern Belt. It is possible that the strange amulet, a peculiar knot of flax, which symbolizes Isis, may be the hieroglyph for a long-forgotten place in which she had her original local cult. Her most famous temple in the latest times, on the island of ΦΙΛΟΙ in the First Cataract, was not built until near the Greek period. Figure 92. Isis Hathor. Parallel with the solarization of Osiris, Isis had to represent heaven as wife and mother of the sun, principally in the daytime. Though as the mother of the stars she also symbolized the sky of night. She is identified with other celestial goddesses, above all with the heavenly cow Hathor, etc., and hence she often bears the horns of a cow on her human head, as a symbol of heaven. Figure 93. The West receiving a departed soul. Later, as the consort of the dying god, Isis is often called Goddess of the West. That is the western sky or the necropoles of Egypt, and thus she is compared with the West, that mythological personage who wears, as a symbol of the western regions, an ostrich feather on her head or instead of her missing head, or simply appears as a headless, i.e., lifeless, figure. This personification of the regions of death receives the sun in the evening, stretching her arms from the sky. Later we even find similar arms stretched from to send the sun forth in the morning so that they become a symbol of heaven. Fig. 94. The celestial arms receiving the sun god. As a personification of the region of the dead, the headless goddess is euphemistically called the good, beautiful West, or the good, fine Acropolis. Or, even more euphemistically, the good, goddess, Norfrit. This mysterious figure receives further strange interpretations. Since, as a hieroglyph, the ostrich feather signifies both Western justice, she is soon also called the goddess of justice, or truth, the daughter of the sun god, Re. Thus justice often stands in the boat of the sun Wa or near his celestial throne in a function which is never explained, but which must have meant more than that the god is righteous. Sometimes this daughter of the sun is connected with the solar Aspis' daughter. Figure 95. The double justice. By a misreading of the word Mashu, the judges who are mentioned in the Hall of Osiris, the theologians of the New Empire come to the conclusion that the justice of Osiris is double. And accordingly, the pictures often represent her thus, or as differentiated into the headless, dead, and the complete, live, form. In the mythologies of other nations, a virgin, often explained as the constellation Virgo, occurs as dying at or after giving birth to the god or gods, and frequently as being deprived of her head. Figure 96. The symbol of the Horus of Edfu. When this doctrine of the double justice became popular, Isis and Nephthys were identified with these two feather-wearing goddesses at the judgment of Osiris. Male deities with two leathers were referred to the same function. All this symbolism, mixed with the Osiris myth,
remained very vague. Figure 97. One of the smiths of Horus. His cult at Edfu, Greek Apollinopolis, is very old, and that city is often supposed to have been his original home. But the special symbol of the Horus of Edfu, the winged disc, seems to militate against this hypothesis, since it betrays the blending of several personifications of the sun god. The mythology of this temple has been handed down only in very late tradition, but it contains interesting features, such as a crowd of valiant smiths, Messenchu, as companions of Horus, the lioness Menet as a nurse, etc. Hierakonpolis, the city of hawks, west of Iltheaspolis, the modern El Kab, at or near the oldest capital of Upper Egypt, would seem to be a much more ancient seat of Horus. But a temple in the delta would better explain his place in the triad. Figure 98. Oldest pictures of Seth. A. Prehistoric. B. and C. from the 2nd dynasty. J. from the 3rd dynasty. His name seems to mean the High One, which would point to an original function as the god of the sky, and even in the latest period, he appears as such when sun and moon are called the eyes of Horus, or when he is regarded as the morning star or as Orion. He was incorporated into the Osirian family by being interpreted as the young rising sun in opposition to the dying evening sun as Osiris. In other words, since Horus was such an important god that he could not be subordinate to his father, he was explained as Osiris reborn in the morning or in the proper season. Figure 99. Seth teaches the young king archery, and Horus instructs him in fighting with the spear. In the New Empire, Seth is sometimes represented in ordinary human form. Originally the adversary, and brother, of Horus only, Seth became the enemy of the whole Osirian triad, the murderer of his brother Osiris, and the persecutor of Isis and Horus. Although this made him the villain among the gods, yet he held full standing as a deity and was especially honored by soldiers, who considered this wild, reckless character, the son of Nut, great of strength, to be their most suitable patron. In contrast to Horus, whose chief weapon is the spear, he is an archer. The cosmic role ascribed to him is that of the god of the sky and of thunder in the conception of the nations north of Egypt, but in a degraded, harmful form, which corresponds to the fact that thunderstorms in Egypt are rare and unprofitable. Thus Seth manifests himself in the thunderstorm. But this is explained as a battle between Horus and Seth, so that lightning is the spear of Horus, and thunder the voice of his wounded antagonist, roaring in his pain. Figure 100. Apop bound in the lower world. After 2500 B.C., the Asiatic myth of the combat between the god of heaven and light, Bel-Marduk, etc., and the abysmal dragon of the ocean, Tiamat, penetrated into Egypt. where it gave rise to the story of the gigantic serpent Apop. Greek pi omicron phi iota sigma, the enemy of the sun god. Only faint traces of the Asiatic tale of the creation of the world from the carcass of the primeval monster, the all-covering abyss, are found in Egypt, perhaps in the idea that iron represents Typhon's bone. Better preserved is the parallel Asiatic version that the dragon was not killed and annihilated, but still lies bound in the depths under the earth or in the ocean, so that an earthquake or the raging of the sea betrays its vain struggles against its fetters. Figure 101. The sons of Osiris guard the fourfold serpent of the abyss before their father. A variant shows the earth god Keb, not reproduced in figure L01. And the four sons of Osiris saw Horus binding four serpents, while a fifth rises from the ground. Behind them stands Osiris before Apop, bound in the lower world, the west. Here also the scene is laid in the cataract region, and the artist seeks mystically to express the belief that the four sources of the Nile, rising from the lower world, may be considered either, according to older traditions, as part of Osiris or as coming from an abysmal depth hostile to this good god. Figure 102. Apop chained by the children of Horus. A variant shows the earth god Keb and the four sons of Osiris or Horus binding four serpents, while a fifth rises from the ground. Behind them stands Osiris before Apop, bound in the lower world, the west. Here also the scene is laid in the cataract region, and the artist seeks mystically to express the belief that the four sources of the Nile, rising from the lower world, may be considered either, according to older traditions, as part of Osiris or as coming from an abysmal depth hostile to this good god.